That's how we roll into this conversation. John, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you guys for tuning into this week's Tweener Head Tennis video today here on the channel. Today we have a very special guest. We have a reoccurring guest here with John Parsons. You may know him from his segments on Crack Rackets. He's one of the most insightful college tennis insiders when it comes to understanding where everyone is and following college tennis for that matter. But we have John back here on the channel to discuss this upcoming 2023-2024 season. And John, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I can't believe we're already having this conversation about the college sport that really never sleeps. You know, we maybe get a few sleepy months in the summer, but now all of a sudden it's back to school and it's back to college tennis.
I'm very excited for it. There's a lot to look out for, and jumping right into it, the rankings came out and some people were on the list, some people were not. Obviously, some turned pro very early on in their college career. But one of the things I wanted to get into was for our singles preview on the men's side to start with. I think the biggest headline was Elliot Spizzirri staying at Texas for his last year, I believe. And after him having these interesting and up and down moments on the pro tour this past summer, were you really surprised he stayed at Texas?
I wasn't. I spoke with him on my show and it seemed like he was going to come back. I think this is someone who this past season in 2023 was ranked number one in singles, number one in doubles, and part of a team that was ranked number one. And he came away from that season with no NCAA title. And so I think, you know, he used the phrase, he has unfinished business. And I think he feels strongly about that. There's a lot of players on that team who are either in their last year of eligibility, Elliot being one of them. And so I think he does feel like he has unfinished business. And ultimately, given the support of things like the ITA ATP Accelerator program, he's able to still go and play challengers this fall and really not sacrifice anything in the long term, right? He's maybe sacrificing a few months in the spring, but ultimately, if he comes out with an NCAA title, I think it'll be well worth it.
100%. And it's kind of what Ethan Quinn did when he went to Georgia. He stayed, he knew he could compete for the NCAA title, he got it, and now he's transitioning over onto that pro side. And you're seeing it with a lot of guys. We saw players like Lerner Tan go after just one semester at USC. Another girl we saw that went pro, oh my gosh, how is her name slipping my mind, from USC as well.
Oh, Maddie
Sieg as well. And the other side of that, kind of the counterpart to the other number one player in the rankings with the first edition of it coming out this month, was Fiona Crawley. Fiona Crawley, for those of you who don't know, was in the news not too long ago for her giving up the prize money from this year's US Open, making it all the way from the first round of qualifying to winning all three rounds, making the first round of the US Open, and not taking the money because she didn't want to risk her eligibility. Were you surprised by that?
No, not at all. I
really,
felt like
okay.
I mean, she said this afterwards. I mean, it could have been millions of dollars and she still would have come back. If you know Fiona Crawley, you know how much she loves North Carolina and college tennis. I was thinking if she made the fourth round or quarterfinals, she would go pro. But I mean, according to her, it wouldn't have mattered. She was coming back regardless. That was the sentiment I felt. It would have been great, you know, for her to be able to take more of that prize money, given that she earned that at the US Open. But no, I wasn't surprised. She's an incoming, you know, senior. She's got 1 year left on that team, looking to go back to back. So I was not surprised that she's back in college.
And she's a very down-to-earth person. She was on your podcast?
I have not had her on, no.
I am surprised by that. You had Chloe Beck on your recent interview, correct?
I did. I've had Chloe Beck on. I've also had Carson Tangillig, who was the doubles partner for Fiona Crawley and winning the NCAA doubles title. But yeah, no Fiona Crawley yet.
No Fiona Crawley. So if Fiona's somehow watching this or listening to it, please go on John's podcast or come on here as well. We'll do a double feature. For you two, is there anyone kind of in contention or this early to say for that number one ranking, or one that can challenge Elliot and Fiona in the singles rankings?
I mean, it's hard. It's pretty rare that we have two players who held the number one ranking for the majority of the prior season who are
Mhm.
both coming back into college. I think what makes Elliot and Fiona so firm in that number one ranking is that they typically play a full college tennis schedule, meaning they play the full fall events. And
Mhm.
I don't know if we'll see Elliot play a fall schedule in college this
Okay.
fall, so there could be an opportunity for players to jump up, like a Chris Rodesh of Virginia, who maybe he'll play a full fall. I would say those are on the men's side in terms of names I think will play a full fall. I would
Mhm.
go with Chris Rodesh, and by a full fall I really mean all Americans and Paul
Yes.
Nats. We can get into that.
Yeah.
uh Chris Rodesh, Nishesh Basavareddy are two names I would circle, and Pedro Rodines are three names I would circle for guys who I expect them to play a full fall, and they could end this fall season as number one in the country.
Okay. It
Uh,
there. Go ahead.
I was gonna give you the women as well.
Oh, please.
On the women's side, I think Mary Stoyana, who's had a great summer and is the number two ranked player in the country. I also think Feng Tian, the NCAA women's singles champion, she did play a fall last year, but
Mhm.
she was a freshman. So I think now that she's fully acclimated into college tennis, I wouldn't be surprised if she has some really strong results this fall.
I'm just looking at the names, at least for the women's side, and out of the five that are currently ranked top five for the women, which one do you think has the best chance at NCAA's?
Well, I think the thing to keep in mind for NCAAs is you always have to skew American, because typically, and will want not typically, they will give the US Open wildcard to an American. There's
Hmm.
just an incentive that is different there for Americans. So of these five right now, Crawley, Stoyana, Alexa Noel, Feng Tian, and Reese Brantmeyer. Feng Tian is the only non-American, and
Yeah.
ironically, she did win the NCAAs. I would circle Fiona Crawley coming into this season as the favorite for that title.
Hmm.
Now, this is just returners, though. So,
Yes.
just like Fang Tian last year won it as a freshman, there
Hmm.
could be other newcomers this season who, you know, overcome Fiona Crawley. But right now, I think she's the favorite for the NCAA singles title.
She's the out. Yes, I would definitely agree with that. And one person I wanted to highlight as well, someone that we had on the channel not too long ago, is Murphy Cansoni. I feel like he's a guy that could push for that number one, two spot. And for him, hearing his motivation to win the whole thing, at least NCAA individuals, is one that I haven't heard from a lot of guys in college, to have that motivation to win individuals.
Yeah, I think you're starting to see that more and more. I think people can look at Ethan Quinn and just look at the springboard that winning NCAAs provides for you. I mean, now Ethan Quinn is in Prudential ads, they're running throughout the US Open, a lot of opportunity that comes with
Mhm.
this title, and a lot of pedigree. Murphy is someone who has always been at the top of the ITA rankings. He was ITA Rookie of the Year his freshman year. Unfortunately, was injured for a lot of last fall.
Yeah.
And the interesting things about how to balance the fall and the spring is at the end of the season, your ranking is comprised of your 15 best singles wins.
Yes.
And those don't matter if those come on September 22nd or if they come on May 22nd, it doesn't matter. And so if you don't play the fall, you miss out on a lot of opportunities to gain those sort of ranked wins, particularly if you're someone like Murphy Casone, who is at the top of the lineup at a school that might not be in the top 10. he might not always get a chance to finish his match, right?
Mhm.
And so those are missed opportunities. So that's someone who was certainly underranked coming into NCAA's last year, goes on to make the semifinals, and now he's in a position to start the season in a top 5 ranking.
And kind of going along that ranking concept or format, I would say is the better way of putting that. The way they, let me ask you this first. Do you think the ranking system can be improved?
Absolutely. Yeah.
How would you change it?
So I personal like so right now I think I have to answer kind of how the rankings work a little
Yes,
bit. Right
please.
now I mentioned the top 15.
Hmm.
You just get points. So
Hmm.
there are so if you beat the number 1 player in the country, you get somewhere around 100 points, right? If you beat
Hmm.
the 25 player in the country, you might get 70 points. It's just a math formula, right? So you start to accrue those wins over the course of the season. They take your 15 best, they divide it by your losses. You would also get like loss points, right? If you
Hmm.
lose to the number 1 ranked player, not that bad. If you
Yeah.
lose to like an unranked player, kind of bad. And then they give you that ranking. And so I think it's a little outdated, right? In
Okay.
terms of the math formula there. I think there are much more sophisticated rating models that take into account things like scoreline is like a pretty basic one that we don't take into account today in the ITA rankings. Um, you know, I know Universal Tennis takes into account something like that. The other thing this doesn't take into account is any results outside of college tennis or outside of the academic year. So, for example, we're not factoring in results that happened last academic year,
Hmm.
nor are we factoring in, results over the summer that happen in a UTR event or an ITF event, or if someone
Hmm.
goes on a run in a challenger. None
Hmm.
of those factor in to your college ranking. And I think that's often where the disconnect comes when people look at the ITA rankings and go, wait a minute, someone just had an awesome summer and they're nowhere to be found in the ITA rankings. It creates this disconnect that I think ultimately undermines the legitimacy of the ITA rankings.
And I think the perfect example is someone that we talked about before recording this was Quinn Van de Castile, correct? Is that how you pronounce his name? From
Yep.
Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And for someone that did well on the ITF tour, for someone who has shown how well he can do, he is 104 in the rankings.
Yeah, and this is someone who made 2 15K finals this summer. He won a 25K title. The reason he is at 104 is because there are no changes that happen in these rankings. We essentially take the May 31st ranking editions,
Mhm.
we pause, and then when we unveil these the first Tuesday after Labor Day, all we do is just remove players who are now ineligible. And so Quinn Van de Castile played 2 for Oregon, finished the season unranked. And so essentially his ranking is just because there were 30, 40 guys above him who get plucked out of the rankings because they're ineligible or taking the fall off. And now he finds himself at 104. But any adjustment for the fact that Quinn had an outstanding summer, that does not happen.
No, it doesn't. And kind of along those same lines, too, with the women's ranking as well, you have the NCAA champion from last year, individuals, not even in the top 3, which to me at least, and it was also interesting to see how at the end of the year, not even the NCAA champion Ethan Quinn got to 1, nor did, and please excuse my mispronunciation with Fangran, with both of them did not finish number 1 in the rankings despite winning individuals. And just kind of on a common sense line of thinking, you would think that if you win the individuals, especially the NCAAs, not even accounting ITAs, you automatically become the number 1 player in singles for college. So
Well, what's interesting is
go ahead.
they do that for the team. So in the team rankings, if you win the team event, let's say you come in seeded 15th, at the end of the season, you are auto number one.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter what the ranking formula would have you after you win the event. Maybe you move from 15 to 9, doesn't matter, you're number one. But on the
Yes.
individuals, we just treat it essentially like another input into the broader season, which in some ways you could say is fair, right? The year-end ITA rankings are a culmination of more than just the NCAA event, right? It's All Americans, it's Fall Nationals, it's all these other events, it's the dual season. But yeah, it's just interesting that on the team event, we kind of have an auto number one, but not on the individuals.
But even for the individuals, to kind of counter that point is, like you said before, if they don't play the fall, or if they somehow are injured during that time or taking time to recover, they won't they'll be affected because they don't participate. And kind of going along those lines of the Pro Tour, where you have a protected ranking, or if you have a wild card, or if you have um, anything along those lines where you get to maintain your ranking and still come into a tournament or come into the season with that PR, that would make more sense for players that either were injured or were not eligible at that time. Like with Lerner, he didn't achieve a ranking because he didn't play the fall, correct?
Well, he was ineligible, right? He had his own eligibility issues, didn't become,
Mm-hmm.
eligible until April. At that point, he just doesn't have enough matches to even be ranked, right? Let alone the fact that he was playing number two. So, yeah, so he's someone that misses out on NCAAs. But you raised an interesting point around a protected ranking. That is something that does not exist at all in college tennis, and might be worthwhile looking into, particularly now that these ITA rankings are becoming more and more important. So they've
Mm-hmm.
traditionally always been a factor in determining All-American status. So for
Mm-hmm.
singles, if you finish in the top 20, you are an All-American. But now we're starting to see the ATP Accelerator program grant wildcards into ATP challengers for top 20 players. And now on the women's side, they just announced this week top 5 women in the ITA rankings get wildcards into ITF events. So I think there's going to be more and more focus on these ITA rankings, which I think will start to expose more and more of some of the inequities that exist today.
And we know that the accelerator program that came out for the men, and this is maybe a side tangent, but the accelerator program for the women is different than the men's one, correct?
It is different. And the large reason behind that is that the WTA doesn't have as robust of a challenger tour infrastructure as
Okay.
the ATP does. So the ATP Challenger Tour has actually several different levels. They start from the kind of 50,000 all the way up to 125. The WTA only offers a 125 level event. And
Yeah.
so everything below that for women is governed by the ITF. And so there's an additional kind of governing body that the ITA would need to negotiate with to land this sort of announcement. And so what
Mhm.
they did is they partnered with the ITF and they said, okay, for the top 5 women, you get wildcards into a 60K, two 40Ks, and two 25Ks. There's some nuances there, but that's generally the gist of the program. So it is less players from the men. The men are 20, the women are 5. It is fewer tournaments. Men are 8, women are 5, and it's lower level tournaments. So the lowest level for the men is 50,000, and for women it's 25,000.
There has to be some hypocrisy there, or at least when they published it, that they noticed that something was wrong there.
I'm sure they do, but it's better than nothing, right? This is
Yeah.
actually like in a vacuum, this is fantastic news for women's college tennis. It's moving that relationship forward to
Mhm.
actually formalize a partnership with the ITF to recognize collegiate excellence is, at that level
Mhm.
of a 60K. So in a vacuum, it's great news compared to the ATP accelerator program. It looks a little lackluster.
I wouldn't say it's disappointing, but it you see the potential, especially with some of the names that are lower on the rankings list for some of the women as well, because even looking at someone like Yulia, who played at Old Dominion that we had on our channel, made the qualifiers automatically from winning a couple ITFs
Mhm.
and made qualifying for the US Open. And she played at a non-power 5 school, still achieved an amazing ranking in singles and doubles, and did well. So it's players like that I don't know, maybe suffer more on the women's side than the men do.
Well, in her case, right, it's like, how does she become top 5? She either has to win events in the fall to pad her ranking, being
Mm-hmm.
from a non-power 5 conference, or go extremely deep in the NCAA tournament, right? And so if you are Fiona Crawley in the ACC, there's just so many more opportunities for you to get those sort of ranked wins to
Exactly.
buoy your ranking.
Exactly. And it's frustrating, but it's a start. I think it's a start for the women's game to kind of move it forward into, and now that college tennis is getting the attention that it's starting to deserve now on the ATP and WTA side, hopefully it'll bring in more so that way there'll be more opportunities for men and women on the tennis side as well. Kind of going into those conferences as well, this is the year before the chaos starts. I think that's the only way to describe it. With
Yeah, the calm before the storm.
exactly, because as a lot of you that may or may not know about college sports, a lot of conferences are realigning due to football and TV rights, which will trickle down into the more non-televised sports, which involves a lot more traveling. The Pac-12 is probably going to cease to exist very soon. The Big Ten is getting bigger, and the SEC is gaining two powerhouses when it comes to tennis, and one of them being Texas with Georgia and Kentucky. I have no idea how it's going to work. I really don't know how we're not going to get. I don't know how it's going to work.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people do, right? And as you mentioned, this is directly tied to football TV rights money, right? And so you have, the people making these decisions are essentially Fox and ESPN as they
Yes,
bid to try and create the best package for their TV deals. And so as a byproduct of that, all of these Olympic sports are, and conferences in general, right, are
suffering.
impacted. Yeah,
Yeah,
and so now you have conferences that are no longer regionally based, and they're national, and that's because ESPN and Fox want to see a nationalized college football product. And so this is the last year. As you mentioned, all of those realignments will happen next year. We are seeing some this year in terms of the schools coming into the Big 12. So
yeah.
for example, like UCF and BYU coming into the Big 12. So that changes some things now, but in general, the following season is when we will see these hit, and it's going to be chaotic. You're going to have an ACC on the women's side well, in general, the ACC will now have Stanford and Cal, which historically have been two extremely strong women's tennis programs. They'll join UNC and Duke and NC State. And so it's kind of going to throw everything to the wind, and it's going to be really difficult to adjust.
I have to say the conference tournament will probably those conference tournaments postseason wise before NCAA team will probably determine the winner of NCAA's because of how good each conference is.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see. It feels like we're always now operating in limbo, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how long will these conferences look like this? I don't
Yes.
know. Do we move to a two state conference world? And
Yeah.
we'll see. It's gonna be feels temporary. It could be a few years, it could be longer than that, but ultimately I think we're now just moving in a world where, like, you are in the conference you're in for the year, and what happens beyond that, you have no idea.
It again, this is all like you said, in limbo. No one really knows what's going to happen in the future. No one really knows what these matchups are going to mean for the teams or the individuals. And maybe the smaller schools that are being affected by it might have better chances of playing against more better teams. Like a what's one example that I could use? I think like a middle Tennessee State. They'll have bigger schools that are going to fly east to play them in an invitational, or if they have South Alabama that can play teams that are coming from the SEC and play at an SEC invitational with smaller schools like that. So it might benefit, it might not. So it's time will tell. That's how I
Yeah, I
would
mean,
describe it.
yeah, one tactical change, and this is going to be true across all NCAA sports, is that championship berths are determined by conference championships. So if you win your conference, you're an auto berth into the NCAAs. And so you could see it. This means if we consolidate conferences, that means there will be less auto berths, which
Yeah.
means there might be more wiggle room around that cut line for teams that maybe aren't in a Power Five. So it's those sort of things that are small, but might actually impact whether or not you make the NCAA championship.
Do you think they would add more, or if I wouldn't say automatically, but if you make the finals, if these conferences start growing, because it seems like, at least on the football side, everything's going to go to a Power Five conference,
Yeah.
and we're going to just solely have five big conferences with probably different divisions. So each conference will have four divisions inside of it. If for the smaller conferences that still exist, do you think they would take more schools from those, or will it still be primarily based, especially if some big schools don't make it into the team?
I think that would be the turning point, right? Is if you have schools who are in, call it a mega power
Yeah.
conference now, who for whatever reason don't get an at large. Now for tennis, I don't see that really happening, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
make the finals of the ACC women's conference championship, like you're a top 10 team, like you're going to get
Yeah.
into the tournament with an at large bid. This might be different for other sports.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it's hard, but the other thing to keep in mind is they still have the 500 rule. So now you
Yeah.
might be in the ACC for women's tennis and you might be a top 30 team, but you might go, 3-13 in your conference. And you don't get into, so if those sort of things start happening, then I think you're going to start to see a lot more schools push for expanding eligibility into the conference championship
Yeah. I
or
never,
NCAA.
yeah, it's interesting because I never thought of it like that. But if teams that are so, if a conference that good and you have a team that has all this talent, you could have, if we were basing it off UTR ratings or the new International Tennis Federation world number, if you have a team that has really good players, say three players inside the top 20 for those numbers, but your team's score is, like you said, 3-13, how does that balance if you're not winning but you still have these amazing players? Because now with transfers it's becoming free agency,
Yeah.
and now all of them are going to leave essentially, and these programs are going to be left in the dust.
Yeah. And I think many people would make this argument and say it exists today where, like, hey, you
Mm-hmm.
could be the worst team in the ACC, but you're still better than some teams that are making, getting into, who are ranked 60, right? I
Exactly.
just think in a new mega conference world, you're going to have to combat things like the 500 rule, right?
Yeah.
And worry about, like, hey, I could lose most of my conference matches. I could still be a top 30 team. Why can't I get into the NCAAs? And so the more situations you have there, I do think the more people are going to start to maybe reevaluate the entrance criteria for NCAAs.
I totally agree. And before we move on to the next topic, I have to find my computer charger in my backpack because this is very professional, Philip. If we go through each conference, can you give me the first team that pops into your head for conference champion? Can we try
Okay.
that?
All right. This is premature, but
This is premature. Big
We're
10.
doing the Power 5 conferences.
Power 5 conferences. No, I'm going to ask you Big Sky. Who do you think in the Big Sky is going to win?
Always a very competitive conference.
It is.
Okay. Men, are we doing men or women for the Power 5?
Let's start with men.
Okay.
Let's start with men. We'll start from Big 10.
Ohio State, heavy favorite.
Heavy favorite. Big 12.
Texas, favorite.
ACC.
Virginia, favorite.
SEC.
South Carolina.
We have to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, South Carolina had a fantastic year in 2023. They made the NCAA round of 16 for the first time since 1989.
Yeah.
And actually, they made the quarterfinals for the first time since 1989. They beat Tennessee in the round of 16, and they pretty much return everyone. Now, they have 3 players that are taking the fall off. I'm assuming that they will be back in the spring. Those are Toby Samuel, Connor Thompson, and James Story.
Mm-hmm.
And they bring in some really talented freshmen. And I think the SEC is actually in a down year this upcoming year because you have a Georgia team that has some depleted roster right now. You have Florida, which is still rebuilding with their new coach, Adam Steinberg. You have Kentucky, who has lost Liam Draxel, maybe Alafia Ayeni for sure. So they still have a pretty young team. So it's, Tennessee returns most players, assuming Johannes Monday comes back. I would say they're neck and neck there with South Carolina. But yeah, I give the nod to South Carolina right now.
Kentucky is young. They've brought in a lot of good freshmen this year, and I feel like they still have Josh. They still have a lot of good veterans and Winks as well. Like I for me at least, I understand why Georgia is in a little bit of a bind. That's why they went to the transfer portal because Ethan Quinn goes pro. Alex doesn't step a foot on campus, which is understandably why after making Newport finals and being in the top 200 already. We did 4 conferences. Who was the 5th? Oh, Pac-12.
Yes. USC.
USC. Okay.
Yeah.
Not Stanford. I'm surprised by that answer.
Well, look, I mean, Stanford has all the talent in the world, particularly if Arthur Ferry returns. But it's just been a challenging few years with them from a health perspective. I feel like I can't bet on Stanford until I see it happen.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go to the women's side of it. And we'll do it in the same order, too. We'll do Big Ten.
I think it's going to be the Michigan women again. I think they're primed to have a very strong season, probably their best in history.
Ooh, okay. Big 12.
Oklahoma State.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Oklahoma State has done a really fantastic job with the transfer portal. They're also hosting NCAAs in 2024, so that will give them a huge advantage, assuming they make the final site.
ACC.
North Carolina.
I thought you were going to say NC State, but I was wrong. SEC.
I think the SEC is definitely back on the women's side this year.
Really?
They had a few down years. I think this is going to be a very strong year for them. I think you have 2 teams that played in the conference final last season that I think will play again, and that's Texas A&M and Georgia. I lean Georgia.
Okay. And Pac-12.
Stanford.
Okay. I like it. If you were to give, I guess Fangren is the only one from UCLA that's that highly ranked in the women right now. Correct?
For what, Pac-12?
Yeah. For UCLA.
Oh, for UCLA, yeah. I mean, they have Kimmy Hance, who
Yes.
has been, ranked, but certainly not, I don't think she made NCAA singles tournament last year.
She's more of a doubles player, correct?
Yeah, well, she plays high up in their lineup, but yeah, she's very solid in doubles.
Very solid in doubles. Okay. I like that. Quick
Yeah.
fire,
Yeah,
easy.
the thing about UCLA is they don't have a lot of players right now.
Yeah.
They only have about 6 girls on the roster.
Neither does Iowa State.
Well, that's why they're not winning the Big 12 this year.
Well, new coach. They only got 4 for the spring, but they're adding, I believe. Oh, what is he telling me? He's adding at least 2 to 4 more, I believe, for the spring because a
Yeah,
lot of the recruits are coming in that late.
yeah, that makes sense. It's given him this fall to really recruit for, spring admits.
I agree. And for you too, kind of going along the names in recognition for this year, is there anyone in particular that we haven't talked about that we think is going to make a big impact? And let's start on the men's side. Is there anyone that people wouldn't look out for that will make an impact this college tennis season?
Well, someone who comes to mind, I did briefly mention him, is Pedro Rodinas of Duke. He was a freshman last season and had an outstanding year. Went undefeated there at the number 2 spot for Duke. I expect him to have a very solid year and play a full fall. So I would circle him. We've already talked about Quinn Van de Castile as someone that I expect to make big leaps this year and kind of make the NCAA tournament. Other players we haven't talked about or might not be top of people's mind. I think you can turn to the newcomers on the men's side. I think there's a few there that should make some waves. Aiden Kim of Florida, one of the top ranked US recruits. I expect Florida will have high demands for him in his first year at Florida. So I'm looking forward to see what he can do in the SEC.
Do you think, well, what surprised me too is one team that flew under the radar, in my opinion, ACC, and I talked to you about this as well as Louisville. Louisville's got some good players. One of their former players today beat Ethan Quinn at the Columbus Challenger. That
Yeah.
was a huge win.
Yeah, a huge win. And he in particular he was playing down at number 5 for Louisville. And again, if you're looking for a testament about the level of college tennis, you can look in a lot of places, but he's one of them, right? In 2019, he was a senior playing at number 5, his, now winning challenger matches, beating the NCAA champion. Louisville had a lot of talent at the top of their lineup last year, just couldn't find all of the pieces together. Now they've lost Fabian Sell, who's gone on and now playing in his pro career. They have 2 guys that will anchor the top of that lineup, most likely Etienne Donay. He's in the top 30 in the ITA preseason rankings. And then they have Natan Rodriguez, who's a top 50 guy. So they're hanging around. In that ACC middle of the pack for sure.
Rodriguez 42, Donay 24.
Yeah.
So they have some solid players coming into this year.
Yeah, and they've always had solid guys at the top of the lineup. The issue with them last season was they couldn't win a match at 5 and 6. And so I'm not that familiar with their incoming class right now, but if they can find guys to shore up the bottom of the lineup, just because when you're playing in the ACC, you're going to get guys who are really strong at 5 and 6. And so it's not enough to just be competitive at 1 and 2.
I 100% agree. So what about the women?
All right. On the women's side, well, I think one player I would say 2 players in the top 10 that I would circle who have maybe gone a little bit under the radar in their college careers. The first is Dasha Vidmanova of Georgia. She's coming in at 6. And again, I think this Georgia team is primed for a spectacular season. And then I would look to Anastasia Komar. So she redshirted at LSU, was not eligible, just played for LSU this past season, played number 1 for them, has now transferred to Oklahoma State. I think if Oklahoma State is to make a deep run this season, it starts with her being one of the best players in the country. So those are certainly 2 players that I would circle. And then I think on the newcomers, I think the women's newcomers are even stronger. than the men. There are two that I would circle. The first is Alexandra Vekic. She has been the WTA top 400. She joins this Georgia team, and I think she will anchor the top of that lineup. I expect very quickly she will be in the top 10 of these ITA rankings. And then lastly, have to mention Catherine Wei joining Stanford, who just won the US Open girls singles title. She'll be the first slam girls champion to play college tennis since 1982.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Singles or both?
Singles.
Singles. Okay.
I didn't do the doubles, but yeah, singles. She will be the first one since 1982.
Because that's a crazy stat, because I was thinking for the men's side as well. Like men's, we've had a couple that have
We've
played
had a
college.
couple. Yeah,
And
Samir Banerjee, Wimbledon, going to Stanford. Yeah, we've had
Tyler Zink for doubles with Elliott. Yep.
Yeah, we've had a lot actually on doubles, like Sebastian Gorsny of TCU, one with Mickelson at Wimbledon. And we've had that on the women's side as well. Both Chloe Beck and Emma Navarro come to mind. They won the French Open girls title together. You have Abby Forbes. Doubles, you get a lot more. But singles, yeah, this is the first time since 1982. So I'm very excited to see what Catherine Hui does at Stanford.
She looked incredible at the US Open Juniors this past year. She got a lot of attention for it. She definitely, I think, has the game to possibly, and it might be too early to tell, but she would go 1 year Stanford, then go pro, depending on how well she does.
Interesting.
Freshman
that's
year.
Something we really don't see often from Stanford, right?
Yeah.
Typically, people will stay at Stanford, they'll get that degree, and then they'll move on unless they're just clearly a cut above the competition. But yeah, I'm very curious to see. That's a very talented Stanford roster. She certainly has the game and the look to be a top player on that lineup, but there's a lot of talent on that team.
Well, I feel like, are we missing someone with A&M's recruits?
So they have the number 3 newcomer. So behind Vekic and Catherine Hui, they have Luciana Perez from Peru. She made the French Open girls final. So she did not win the title, but she made the final. So she has been ranked as high as, I believe, either 2 or 3 in the world and on the ITF junior ranking. So she's an outstanding player, and I'm very curious to see how her game translates to the collegiate ranks. She's very experienced on clay, a little bit more diminutive in size, so curious to see how that translates.
Highest ranking was 3. Current ranking right now is 4. She definitely has the fire for it. She definitely brings the energy from what I've seen in the past.
In college tennis, like a hand in the glove. Yeah.
100%. I definitely agree. And I apologize to those that are watching me struggle with my camera overheating. That is why I currently switched, but we're living. I'm trying to think for this year's college tennis season, is there anything? I'm trying to think, because if you were to say one thing that's going to change this year versus last year, what do you think something that's changing or has changed for this upcoming season?
Well, I actually think one of the big things is the accelerator programs and their emphasis on the fall results. So when we found out about the ATP accelerator program, it was in January. It was after the fall had already been done, right? And now we know that coming into this season, knock on wood, there'll be a similar accelerator program for next year. And so at least everyone has that information going into the fall. And what that should translate to is more players playing as much as possible in the fall so that they can build up their ranking. So I do think that that's a big change. I think most players haven't cared that much about it, and now they should.
It's another incentive for them as well.
Exactly.
It's one of those things where those that are trying to get into challenger or ITF level tournaments now, and to be honest, during that winter break or in between spring and fall, there's going to be a lot of players trying to travel and take advantage of these rankings, because they know they can achieve it versus trying to wait until the summer to then use all of their time instead of training or doing something else. I feel like I like that answer because you can see how well they're going to do or what they're going to strive for at the end of the fall season this year.
Yep, exactly. Or throughout the fall season, right? They're going to play these events to build up that ranking so that they can leverage that, once they hopefully are eligible for the accelerator program.
100% agree. And John, it's always a pleasure of having you on and talking about college tennis because this is just ESPN just needs to start broadcasting more college tennis. We need more eyes on the game for people to understand what energy is brought to the game on the college level. It's not your pro level atmosphere. It's a different beast. And I'm very glad to say that you are always welcome on the channel. I'm very glad that you are here talking to us. Definitely go check out John's podcast. No ad, no problem. Chloe Beck was his recent guest. Can you give us an insight or a sneak peek as to who you're having on in the future or who you're going to have on?
Well, I mean, you can look at these rankings and assume I will have reached out to most of these players. It's been really fun getting to know these players more in depthly, more about their stories as well prior to college.
Mm-hmm.
The interview with Chloe Beck, I mean, you're getting the behind the scenes of why she slices her backhand so much might have to do with a sliced bagel incident, right? You get to know them a little bit more in depth, and it's great to hear. But we'll also be, transitioning the podcast focus to fall season content. We have
Okay.
All Americans coming up in October. You have Fall Nationals in November. So I think a combination of previewing those individual events, recapping those individual events, as well as starting to prepare our preseason top 10 and kind of dropping those throughout the fall as we prepare for what should be another fantastic season in 2024.
Are you traveling at all for these events?
I have a tentative. I might go to Fall Nationals in San Diego. I'm based in the Bay Area, so that one isn't too far. But getting to Oklahoma and Cary, North Carolina is a little harder. But yeah, tentatively, I'm penciled myself in for Fall Nationals in San Diego.
All right. So we will be on the edge of our seats trying to see that content. But John, thank you again for joining us today. Make sure to check out his Instagram, his podcast down in the links in the description below. Make sure you are subscribed to Tweener Head Tennis, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you again, John, for joining us, and we'll see you guys soon.